Shadow Pokemon are the strongest Pokemon in the game. So today we're going to run through the full new February 2024 and onwards Grunt lineups in Pokemon Go, what Shadow Pokemon you can currently get from Grunts, which one can be Shadow Shiny, and which ones are the best to go after. So without further ado, let's not waste your time and get right into it. So there are a total of 18 different types of grunts, but we're going to start off with the normal grunt here. Now do note every single grunt can be easily identified by the sentence they say when you click on them, and the normal grunt will be normal does not mean weak. By the way, shout out to LeakDuck for these graphics. So from the normal grunt, you will be able to encounter a Meowth, Teddiursa, or a Standler, which all three can be Shadow Shinies. Based on these graphics, by the way, you'll know you can catch it based on the little Pokeball icon here that you don't see on the second one. The only good one here is going to be Shadow Teddiursa, which can evolve into Shadow Ursa Luna, which is going to be a good Master Premier Cup Pokemon. The only other reason I would battle this normal grunt is for the Shadow Shinies, but they're not that great. Nonetheless, that moves us to the Fire Grunt. By the way, certain grunts can only be female or male, in which the Fire Grunt can only be a female. So if you see a female, there's a chance it's a Fire Grunt. The sentence she'll say is, do you know how hot Pokemon Fire Breath can get? And from the encounters, you can get a Shadow Growlithe, which can be a Shiny Shadow, a Shadow Houndour, or a Shadow Chimchar. Unfortunately, none of the Pokemon from the Fire Grunt are very good right now, so this is a grunt you could probably avoid. That moves us into the Water Grunt, which actually has two different types. We have the female Water Grunt, which will say these waters are treacherous and of course be a female. Gain you encounter with a Shadow Barboach, Shadow Corphish, or Shadow Piplup. Shadow Barboach can evolve into Shadow Wishcash, which is a very good Great League Pokemon right now and sees a lot of play in the play Pokemon metas. Shadow Piplup can evolve into Shadow Empoleon, which is a decent Ultra League Pokemon. Other than that though, not too much from that grunt. But that moves us into the male Fire Grunt, which is again going to say these waters are treacherous, but will always be a male, getting you an encounter with a Shadow Magikarp only. Shadow Magikarp is great because Shadow Gyarados is going to be good in the Ultra League and in the Master League, as well as being a good water type raid attacker. That moves into the next grunt though, which is going to be the electric type grunt. This will be always a female and will have the sentence, get ready to be shocked. This can get you an encounter with a Shadow Mareep, Shadow Blitzel, Shadow Joltik, Shadow Alolan Geodude, or a Shadow Voltorb. Shadow Mareep can evolve into Shadow Ampharos, which is a pretty good Ultra League Pokemon. Shadow Joltik can evolve into Shadow Galvantula, which is going to be a good Great League and Ultra League Pokemon. Shadow Alolan Geodude can evolve into Shadow Alolan Golem, which is not a bad rock type raid attacker, and can also evolve into Shadow Alolan Graveler, which does see play in some limited Great League Cups. And finally, Shadow Voltorb can evolve into Shadow Electrode, which is good in some limited Great League Cups. Next up, the Grass Grunt is going to be always a male and will have the sentence, don't tangle with us. Can you encounter with a Shadow Hoppip, a Shadow Seedot, which can be a Shiny Shadow Seedot, or a Shadow Turtwig. Shadow Seedot evolving into Shadow Shiftry is not a bad Pokemon for some limited Great League metas, but overall, the Grass Grunt is not the best right now. That moves into the Ice Grunt though. It's going to be a female always and will have the sentence, you're going to be frozen in your tracks. It can get you an encounter with a Shadow Swinub, Shadow Snorunt, or Shadow Snover, and all three are actually pretty good. Shadow Swinub evolves into Shadow Mamoswine, which is one of the best ice type raid attackers in the game, as well as ground type raid attackers in the game, and also does see some play in the Master League. Shadow Snorunt evolves into Shadow Frostlass, which is a decent Great League Pokemon. Finally, Shadow Snover evolves into Shadow Abomasnow, which is good in some Great League limited metas, as well as good in the Ultra League. Always do the Ice Grunt, it's pretty much always been good. Next up, the Fighting Grunt will have the sentence, this buff physique isn't just for show, getting you encounter with a Shadow Machop, Shadow Hisuian Sneasel, Shadow Makuhita, Shadow Hitmonlee, Hitmonchan, or Hitmontop. By the way, Shadow Machop can be a Shiny Shadow. The best ones here are going to be Shadow Machop evolving into Shadow Machamp, which is one of the best fighting type raid attackers in the game right now, as well as good in the Great League and in the Ultra League. Shadow Makuhita evolves into Shadow Hariyama, which is not a bad fighting type raid attacker. And finally, Shadow Hitmontop does see some play in the Great League and the Ultra League. Overall, it's great to see Shadow Machop back in the Fighting Grunts. That moves on to the Poison Grunt though, which is always going to be a female and will have the sentence, coiled and ready to strike. From this, you can get a Shadow Coughing, which can be a Shiny Shadow, a Shadow Krogunk, Shadow Fungus, Shadow Nidorina, and Shadow Nidorino. I don't know if I mixed those up, but these guys on screen. The best ones here are going to be Shadow Krogunk, which evolves into Shadow Toxicroak, a very good Great League and Ultra League Pokemon. And the blue one here, Shadow Nidorina, evolves into Shadow Nidoqueen, which is good in the Great League and the Ultra League and limited cups. Overall, a great PvP Pokemon. That moves on to the Ground Grunt though, which is always going to be a male and how the sentence, you'll be defeated into the ground. This can get you a Shadow Alolan Diglett, a Shadow Wooper, Shadow Drillbur, or Shadow Rhyhorn in the second slot. The best ones here are Shadow Wooper evolving into Shadow Quagsire, a good Great League Pokemon, Shadow Drillbur evolving into Shadow Excadrill, a good Master League Pokemon, as well as good as a ground type raid attacker. Finally, Shadow Rhyhorn evolving into Shadow Rhyperior, a good Master League Pokemon, as well as one of the best rock and ground type raid attackers in the game. Really good grunt grunt to go after there. There's a lot of great options. Next up though, we have the Flying Grunt, which is one of the ones I'm most excited for. It's always going to be female and will have the sentence battle against my flying type Pokemon, but this can get you an encounter with a Shadow Murkrow, which can be a shiny shadow, a Shadow Gligar, which can be a shiny shadow, and a Shadow Starly. First of all, Shadow Murkrow evolves into Shadow Honchkrow, which is a decent flying type raid attacker. But next up is Shadow Gligar, which is one of the best Great League Pokemon, and Gligar has not been available in the Shadow form for a while, so it's great to see this back for anybody who needs this Shadow Pokemon. Also, Shadow Gligar can evolve into Shadow Gliscor, which is pretty good in the Ultra League. Finally, we're gonna have Shadow Starly, which evolves into Shadow Staraptor, a good Ultra League Pokemon, as well as a very good flying type raid attacker in the game. That moves on to the Psychic Grunt though, which is always gonna be a male and says, are you scared of the psychics that use unseen powers? This can get you a Shadow Slowpoke, a Shadow Wobbuffet, a Shadow Giraffrig, or a Shadow Ralts. The best ones here are going to be Shadow Wobbuffet, which you can actually purify to get the move Return, and if you have a Hundo at level 50, it's gonna be very good in the Great League. Also, Shadow Ralts is in there, which evolves into Shadow Gardevoir, one of the best fairy type raid attackers in the game right now, and also pretty good in some limited Great League metas. Also, Shadow Gallade is also pretty good in some limited Great League metas. That moves on to the Bug Grunt though, which is always going to be male and says, go my super bug Pokemon. This can get you a Shadow Pineco, which can be a shiny shadow, a Shadow Shuckle, a Shadow Dwebble, Shadow Weedle, or a Shadow Skorupi. Shadow Weedle evolves into Shadow Beedrill, which is pretty good in some limited Great League metas, and Shadow Skorupi evolves into Shadow Drapion, which is good in some Great League and Ultra League metas. Moving on to one of the best grunts though, the Rock Grunt, which is always going to be a male and says, let's rock and roll. This can get you a Shadow Onix, Shadow Cranidos, Shadow Shieldon, Shadow Graveler, Shadow Lileep, or Shadow Anorith, and a lot of good ones here. Shadow Onix can evolve into Shadow Steelix, which is a good Great League and Ultra League Pokemon. Shadow Cranidos can evolve into Shadow Rampardos, which is rock type raid attacker in the game right now. Shadow Shieldon can evolve into Shadow Bastiodon, which does have some play in the Great League. Finally, Shadow Lileep can evolve into Shadow Cradily, which is a very good Great League and Ultra League Pokemon right now, core breaking a lot of popular teams. Next up, the Ghost Grunt, which is going to be a male and will always say ki. I don't know why that's what they decided as a sentence. Nonetheless, this can get us a Shadow Mischievous, Shadow Drifloon, or Shadow Golett. The only good one here is Shadow Drifloon evolving into Shadow Drifblim, which does see some play in some limited Great League metas as well as in the Ultra League. Really not the best grunt to do. But that moves into probably the best grunt to do, which is the Dragon Grunt, which will always be a female and sends the sentence, roar, how does that sound? This can get you a Shadow Alolan Executor, a Shadow Dratini, which can be a shiny shadow, and a Shadow Gibble. The best ones here are Shadow Dratini evolving into Shadow Dragonite, one of the best dragon type raid attackers in the game right now, as well as good in the Master League and in the Ultra League. Shadow Gibble also can evolve into Shadow Garchomp, which is good in the Master League and also one of the best ground type and dragon type raid attackers in the game. You can't go wrong with this grunt, although I will say it is a pretty rare grunt to go after. Moving on though to the Dark type grunt, which is going to be a female and says, wherever there is light, there is also shadow, getting you a Shadow Alolan Rattata, a Shadow Houndour, or a Shadow Skunky. Shadow Alolan Rattata evolving into Shadow Alolan Raticate. If you purify that and give it the move Return, it can be pretty good in some special cups like the Kanto Cup. Shadow Skunky evolving into Shadow Skuntank though is pretty good in the Ultra League. But then moves to the Steel Grunt, which is always going to be a male and says, you're no match for my Iron Will, getting you a Shadow Alolan Sandshrew, Shadow Skarmory, Shadow Pharaoh Seed, Shadow Larion, or Shadow Matang. And this is a pretty good grunt. Shadow Alolan Sandshrew evolving into Shadow Alolan Sandslash, a good Great League and Ultra League Pokemon. Shadow Skarmory is going to be good in the Great League and the Ultra League, and we haven't seen this Shadow back in a while. Shadow Pharaoh Seed evolves into Shadow Pharaoh Thorn, which does see some play in some limited Great League metas. And finally, Shadow Matang evolving into Shadow Metagross, which is good in the Master League, as well as the best Steel type raid attacker in the game right now. And that moves into one of the last type grunts here, which is going to be the Fairy Grunt, which will always be a female and says, check out my cute Pokemon. This can get you a Shadow Alolan Vulpix, Shadow Ralts, Shadow Mawile, Shadow Snubbull, Shadow Granbull, or Shadow Curlia. Best ones here are Shadow Alolan Vulpix evolving into Shadow Alolan Ninetales, good in the Great League and the Ultra League. Shadow Ralts and Shadow Curlia we already went ahead and talked about, but those Pokemon are definitely worth grabbing. Shadow Mawile is a pretty good Pokemon for some limited Great League metas. And finally, Shadow Snubbull evolves into Shadow Granbull, which is good as a fairy type raid attacker. Okay, that's all the type grunts, but now we have some typeless grunts I want to talk about, which is going to include the male typeless grunt, which will say the sentence, winning is for winners. It can also say the sentence, get ready to be defeated, or I've already won, something like that. I think there's like 3 sentences this thing can say. But these can get you the shadow versions of any of the Hoenn starters. The best ones to grab from these are going to be the Shadow Trico evolving into Shadow Sceptile, which is a good grass type raid attacker. Shadow Torchic evolving into Shadow Blaziken, which is one of the best fire type raid attackers in the game. And Shadow Mudkip evolving into Shadow Swampert, which is good in the Great League, good in the Ultra League, League, and good as a water and ground type raid attacker. Overall, this is not a bad grunt to do at all, but arguably the better grunt is going to be the female Typeless grunt, which again will say winning is for winners, get ready to be defeated, or don't bother, I've already won, getting you the old Shadow Snorlax, which is one of the rare Shadow Pokemon to get. Shadow Snorlax is going to be good in the Ultra League and very, very good in the Master League. Definitely a Pokemon worth going ahead and picking up. Finally, that moves us into the leaders and Giovanni. Before we talk about it, we have to talk about the Decoy Grunt. If you equip the Black Rocket Radar, you can actually encounter fake versions of Giovanni's at Pokestops. And those are called Decoy Grunts, which will have Shadow Bellsprout encounters, which can be shiny Shadow Bellsprout. So if you want to easily hunt a shiny Shadow, do it through those Decoy Grunts by equipping the Black Rocket Radar. Shadow Bellsprout as well evolves into Shadow Victory Bell, which is a good Pokemon for the Great League, and also a good poison type raid attacker. But that moves us into the leaders. First of all, starting off with the most popular, which is going to be Arlo, which looks like this if you don't know. Defeat Arlo and you will get an encounter with a Shadow Bagon, which of course can be a shiny Shadow, and you can evolve that into a Shadow Salamence, which is the best dragon type raid attacker in the game right now, so definitely worth doing the Arlos. It's probably the best one to go after. Next up, we have the Sierra, which looks like this if you don't know what Sierra looks like. We'll get you an encounter with a Shadow Tentacool, which can be a shiny Shadow, and evolves into Shadow Tentacruel, which is good in the Great League and the Ultra League. Finally, we have the Cliff, which looks like this. Gets you an encounter with a Shadow Zubat, which of course can be a shiny Shadow Zubat, and Zubat can evolve into Golbat, which is good in the Great League and Great League Limited metas like the Halloween Cup. To battle the leaders, by the way, you do need one of those gray rocket radars, which you can get by defeating 6 grunts and getting 6 mysterious components, or just buying them in the shop. And finally, that moves us into Giovanni, the big boss man, which to defeat, you actually need a Black Rocket Radar. By the way, a lot of people were saying that they weren't able to find where their Black Rocket Radar was from this season, and you actually have to complete the Timeless Travels special research story, which we've had since the start of the season. I believe it's like 14 pages. Complete that, and at the end, you will get a Black Rocket Radar. So there's no actual separate research, it's just built into that research for this season. But defeating Giovanni will get you an encounter with a Shadow Kyogre, which cannot be Shadow Shiny, but Shadow Kyogre is the best water type raid attacker in the game right now, and also very good in the Master League. So it's definitely worth battling Shadow Kyogre. And if you actually have more than one radar, I would probably grab yourself like 2 or maybe 3, but also at the same time, you might want to save them for when Shadow Groudon or Shadow Rayquaza comes, because those are also going to be very strong. Now, I will be hunting all of these shiny Shadows and new Shadow Pokemon tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll put the stream right under me, so go ahead and check that out if you want to see me go after some of these. But that is the new Shadow lineup in Pokemon Go. Comment below which one you're going to be going after, and we'll see you on the next one. Follow for more tips. Peace.